Hi, everyone, and welcome to Subsistence Crop, a podcast cultivated by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt, where we talk about human-cannabis relationships beyond commerce and prohibition.
Welcome to Subsistence Crop, Josh, the Cannabis Studies podcast. Today, I am super excited to have you on the podcast and have Cade leading the questioning on this, so I'm going to turn it right over to Cade.
Hey, Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Well, I guess the first thing everyone wants to know, especially here in the program, is how did you and Dom meet? Because Dom talks a lot about you, and I want to know how you guys even met.
Is this going to be edited?
Could be, yeah.
No, I'm teasing.
If you say anything that you regret later, yes, we can cut it out.
I was trying to think of a wild story to create. No, Dominic and I met through a mutual friend and colleague, Tony Salvaggio. How many years ago? 12 years ago. 12 years ago, 2012, when we invited Dominic to come and give actually the first talk as part of a speaker series organized by the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research.
Nice.
We had just been chartered, and Dominic came and gave a excellent talk on his research on camp and Sohum in the Emerald Triangle.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then where are you from?
Where am I from? Originally?
Yes.
Berkeley, California.
Great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How'd you make your way up to Humboldt?
I came here my first year of college and went away and came back. And part of my being here probably informs a lot about my return to the place, both, professionally, personally, but also thinking about my research interests. Coming back to Humboldt was sort of a homecoming.
So would you come up here to study?
When I came here as a student 500 years ago, I came here as a first-year college student who didn't know what I wanted to study.
Mm-hmm. Like many?
Yeah, like many.
Right.
I was actually going to, this is a digression. I was going to be a chef, and I wanted to, I actually had no intention of remaining at Humboldt. Humboldt was going to be a stepping stone, if you will, not in terms of cannabis use, but in terms of using Humboldt to get ready to go to Cornell, study hotel administration.
Oh.
Wow, I didn't know that.
That was the top tier program for
Sweet.
hotel food service, because I still all am about food, and cooking. And so, yeah, I came here for that. And
What was here in terms of the culinary arts or the
nothing,
hotel
absolutely
administration?
nothing.
How was it a stepping stone?
I came here. You're talking to somebody who wasn't a serious student in high school,
Right.
So it was a stepping stone to learn how to become a student. Many people come to Humboldt who really weren't students in high school. Let's be clear. Not everybody, but a lot of undergraduates come to Humboldt because for some, like myself, there weren't other options for college, and I wanted to learn how to become a student. And so it was wonderful for that. I had great small classes, same thing that brings a lot of people here, but I actually studied business administration. God, it was dreadful.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
I survived a year of accounting. And that's when Humboldt was on the quarter system.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I still have, it's triggered every tax season. Yeah.
Being the cannabis studies program, I feel like we have to ask, how did your relationship with cannabis start?
Well, before Humboldt, for sure. I grew up in Berkeley, right? I already said that.
Right.
Period.
Any more?
Well, anything more? No, I was a teenager in the early 1980s. I was a college student in the 1980s. Drug and alcohol use in all its forms was ubiquitous. The student who did not drink or smoke weed or tobacco or use other mind-altering substances was the exception. And I was always fascinated by those students, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The straight edge, is kind of the term for that subculture, those that are organized. But the point being, it was everywhere in Berkeley. Yeah, so, from a young age, it was all around, And
How young an age?
in terms of when did I first see people? Yeah. My first awareness of it is seeing adults using it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I was probably under 10 years old. Yeah.
Like at a dinner party or like in public or?
It's Berkeley in the 70s, right? So you walk down Telegraph Avenue or, wherever. But, at some point, like anything, you have to have an awareness that, that's something different, right? And then why are people using it? And now why are some people concerned about its use? It was an early awareness of it, but coming to Humboldt was significant because certainly I'd seen, it grown in Berkeley and seen it, used it, of course, like, any teenager at the time. But coming to Humboldt, it was so fascinating to see the how it was so. This is 1985. It was very much a part of this community in terms of the price. It was so easy to access, maybe being a college student. One of the things that kind of still sticks with me, and, Dominc, you've heard this story many times, is, walking into a sporting goods store on the Arcata Plaza. The outdoor store is what it was called. It's where it doesn't matter where it is, except it's right on the plaza. And I was buying something there, and I'm at the checkout, and there was a little brochure that said, it was green, and I still have it. It says outdoor alert, and it's warning folks going into the backcountry about marijuana farmers, growers. And I had read it. I remember reading it thinking, wow, I didn't know there was something I need to be fearful of going into the woods, that there are people who are rigging up booby traps and who are armed and dangerous. And I thought it was really, as a 19-year-old, I was really fascinated. I think maybe I was 18. I thought it was really alarmist, quite frankly, me and my buddies, we went mountain biking, we explored the woods, never crossed our mind. Weed was plentiful. It was dirt cheap back then, although more expensive than it is now, I guess. But it was $100 an ounce when I was a student.
Which in inflation, like you're taking down inflation, we can't make that calculation right now, but it's a lot more than $100.
Yeah.
In today's dollars.
Right. Yeah, but at the time it seemed really cheap. And so is the point in response to your question, it was ubiquitous. It was common. It was everywhere. It was easy to access. And so, that fueled, I think, a lot of my interest returning to this place. How many years later? A lot of years later. I came back in 2001.
And where did you step off to?
I finished my undergrad degree at UC Santa Cruz, studying sociology and languages. So I did a dual major. And one of my primary mentors as a undergrad at Santa Cruz was a sociologist by the name of Craig Reinerman, who's done a lot of, important, influential drug research, and taught a class that was really impactful for me. And then he was my advisor, finishing my degree. And we stayed in touch over the years. And he encouraged me to look at Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder. So I ended up at Boulder. And after a variety of twists and turns, I ended up finishing my dissertation at Boulder.
Gravitate towards cannabis.
No.
Places.
Well, ironically, my doctoral work had nothing to do with weed, had nothing to do with cannabis.
But couldn't have at that time.
Right. I mean, that's yes, good point. So I was in Boulder from 92 to, well, I finished my degree. I didn't remain in Boulder that whole time, but I finished my degree in '01, so 9 years. And legalization was, what, 11 years later in 2012.
When did you think, like, okay, I could teach?
When did I think I could teach?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think about that a lot lately at this point in my career because as a graduate student, I really struggled with teaching. You know, there's an assumption that it just comes naturally. And that was the model actually, that they never provided people any instruction in teaching. It's like this assumption that you're knowledgeable. And because you're knowledgeable about lots of abstract things, or maybe even concrete things, suddenly one is going to have the ability to not impart, but well, for some it's imparting. I mean that pedagogy will just come. You'll know how to do what you're hired to do. And so, though there was a program for graduate students, and you know maybe you experienced this too, Dominic, in grad school, to train graduate students to teach, it was not a priority. There's a lot more emphasis on training teachers at the secondary school level and high school level than there is in college. And so I really struggled. I thought, man, this is really rough. I don't know if I could do this. And it's like anything in life. I think it's about finding your voice, and what your comfort level is, where your comfort level in terms of everything about being a teacher, your relationship with students, your style, what you have in your pedagogical toolbox, what feels like who you are, if that makes sense. I had a professor who used the metaphor of, in terms of thinking of your voice. Are you a clenched fist or an open hand in terms of just kind of your approach to everything about teaching? And, from rigidity to absolutely zero structure. And, arguably, I would say neither of those extremes are a good way to go, like stepping into a space and say, hey, what do you want to learn?
Yeah, for sure.
Versus, all right, this is the rule, dot your I's. And if you don't, forget it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So when did the creation of HIIMR come around? And who are the other co-founders of HIIMR?
So HIIMR was the Humboldt Institute for Interdisciplinary Marijuana Research was created first informally as we called ourselves the Marijuana Studies Working Group in about 2010. And that was an auspicious time because California was considering, was it Prop 19, I believe? Yeah, the first effort at legalization. And, like I said, I mean, you certainly coming back to this area, the significance of cannabis in this place was so evident in very different ways than it is now. It's kind of hard to think about that being in the past, but that generated conversations with colleagues across the university, like, hey, you're in social work, or you're in economics, or you're in psychology, or you're in, forestry. We're all interfacing with this plant in very sometimes cross-disciplinary ways, and we should have conversations, and it's nice to be able to get together with others who maybe ask different questions. They look at the plant through a different lens, maybe one person is interested in the economic impact on the local community. For me as a sociologist, I'm interested in representation, and meaning and certainly how that shapes policy. And so how are groups represented? What are the intended and unintended consequences of different policy decisions? Who gets to make those decisions? Who's at the table? Who's excluded? But we're all focusing on the plant some way. And so we got together and started to have early conversations. We thought, well, let's just start to get together and share our work. And that was actually really kind of a vibrant time because People were genuinely sharing research ideas, sharing their research. We had brown bag get-togethers. The university president came. We had a university president who, would show up, and it was really quite wonderful. He'd show up to events, I would say almost religiously, to the extent that I used to joke that, he must be, one of three, that, maybe he's got two identical siblings, because it was, we were always, flummoxed as to how he could be in so many places at one time. But the point being, we also had conversations about, well, what do we want to accomplish as a faculty who share a common interest in cannabis? Perhaps we should create some sort of collective identity beyond this working group. Why would we do that? What are the potential possibilities? And, in the Cal State system, there are centers and institutes. We decided to become an institute. At the time, the common term was marijuana. People were not really, at least locally, and I'd say arguably nationally, cannabis was not the term that was referencing the plant at the time. And so marijuana became part of the name. And I bring that up because a later president was suggesting that we should change the name because allegations that the term marijuana is racist because it's linked to, a narrative, the Mexican hypothesis, right? That it was, the cannabis became prohibited solely because it was, migrant workers who had brought the habit of smoking cannabis into the United States. I'm giving you a very long-winded answer, but just getting it on the record that we decided to form an institute using the term marijuana. That core group of faculty looked around the table and said, well, who wants to be the co-directors? Who wants to lead this? I raised my hand, and a colleague in economics, Eric Eschker, also stepped up. And so we were the first co-directors of HIIMR. And it was an interesting time because as soon as we became chartered as an institute, a story was written in the local paper about it, in the Times Standard by Chris Durant, and it was picked up by the Associated Press. And I'd never had that experience. When a story gets picked up by the AP, it goes national. And so all of a sudden we were getting bombarded with inquiries, phone calls, and other media who wanted to find out about this program. And there was a lot of of course there's a lot of ignorance out there around cannabis, but there was an assumption that it was a cannabis studies degree program and that we were offering training in, like we have now, finally, right?
Right.
10,
But
12
unlike
years
we
later.
have now as well.
What's that?
What they thought is still unlike what we have
Well,
now.
that's true. That's a very good point. So there's still ignorance is a constant, but it wasn't just from media. It was like entrepreneurs. Hey, I wish I could have saved some of those voicemail messages. People with different designs for vaporizing cannabis, and they would love to get our institute behind some cultivation technique or fertilizer recipe, and all kinds of crazy inquiries. But also got picked up by somebody by the name of Jimmy Kimmel, and he did a skit. He folded into his show, and it's actually quite funny what he did. We handed him kind of a skit in saying Humboldt State University is creating the first program in cannabis in the country, which is not what it was. Mm-hmm. But so he created the skit, and it was funny, but it was also very unfair to Humboldt students in the way Humboldt students were being represented. Take a look at the skit. I'm sure you could dig it up. But after that, we tried to invite Jimmy Kimmel to come speak at graduation, figuring any publicity is good publicity at that point. But that's the formation of HIIMR. So that was 2012. A lot of our early activity was creating, creating spaces for people to share their research and knowledge and trying to build connections with the community. And there was enormous interest because, again, keep in mind, this is 2012. So, 4 years before Prop 64, and cannabis was front and center in the news for a variety of reasons in this area. And so at these talks, we'd have routinely, I'd say between 75 and 150 people that would show up, sometimes standing room only.
My talk, it was absolutely full.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The first one.
And the president showed
Yeah.
to those early meetings, and other faculty, and there was a lot of interest because there was a lot that was not known. Because cannabis, you have to understand, during this time was not something that it was the green elephant in the room, that it was clearly in the room, but nobody wanted to acknowledge it. And I say in the room in terms of the community, not just in terms of cultivation, in terms of the plant and growing it and the environment, but also the economics, the culture. How that was so much a part of defining this place since the 1960s. And so, I think what was changing is there was an acknowledgement that we actually should have conversations, that we should be asking questions. It's ripe for study, ripe for a undergraduate degree program eventually.
Yeah.
So
Did your work with HIIMR put you in collaborations with international cannabis researchers?
early on, I'm trying to think.
Talk about worldwide weed, man.
Oh yeah, well yeah, of course. But that was later on. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Worldwide Weed is that's the website, worldwideweed.nl. But they call themselves, that's the domain name they got. The name of the consortium is the Global Cannabis Research Consortium, GCC RC, and they have sponsored 2 waves of an international cannabis cultivation survey, the most recent in 2020. Yeah, so it did put me in touch with folks from primarily North American and European countries, but there is representation from, I know we have folks from Uruguay. I'm not sure if there's, I can't think off the top of my head if there's any representation from Mexico. But cannabis scholars from a variety of different countries interested in primarily, with this group, small scale cultivation. And that's kind of created all sorts of interesting questions about, who are you studying? Are you studying industry folks? Or are you studying hobbyists, leisure growers?
Craft.
Right.
Yeah, craft growers, however you want to reference them, because you're also talking about growers in Canada, U.S. states, and Uruguay who come to it for very different reasons, maybe, at least, or legally and contextually, than in places like Spain and Belgium and the UK and Germany and Switzerland.
Right.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about some more cannabis research ideas you have for the future?
For the future, that's a tough question because I'm trying to finish things I'm doing
Okay,
now.
well then what about now?
Well, we're actually, in reference to that international group, I'm leading on a paper examining gender differences and experiences growing weed internationally. We have data from 2012, and we just did a survey 2020, and right away we could see just even in our sample, there's a far greater ratio of, let me rephrase that, the ratio of male to female growers has dropped. So proportionally, there's more women who are growing.
More diverse.
Yeah, well, and whether that reflects actually a change, we don't know. These are not representative these are not representative data,
Gotcha.
right? So we're not able to generalize to all growers. but we're interested in looking at, the motivations for growing, the experiences of growing. And so that's some work that I'm involved in right now. I'm, and work that I'm hopefully getting off my plate in this year, as well as work that I began too long ago, and that has to do with examining representations of growers in this region historically. So specifically looking at claims about Mexican drug cartel involvement in cannabis. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, jumping back to teaching, I want to know your favorite class that you've taught, and then I want to go and talk about drugs in society.
Oh,
let's
well,
first-
that's the answer to
Oh,
the
okay,
question.
great. You want to
Yeah.
talk about drugs in society?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like cannabis, I think studying drugs defined very broadly is a wonderful vehicle to studying all different aspects of social life, policy making, and economics, and so many different spheres of society, different institutions. And so, I approach the class, as I say, defining drugs very broadly, beyond the obvious, binary of legal versus illegal. I think it's important to examine different ways of altering one's consciousness. And what are the vehicles that people do that? Is that a new phenomenon? Why are we concerned about it? Are we always concerned? Who's concerned about it, and why? What times and what places? So that's one of the ways I try to frame up the course, just kind of questioning fundamentally the motivations for altering one's state of consciousness. And certainly in terms of thinking about what kinds of drugs we're talking about, they generally are mind altering. But the last time I taught the course, and it's certainly still very much in the news, actually looking at I can't remember the names of the actual medications, but it's abortion pills. I mean, that's the term. That a person 50% of the abortions that occur in the United States now are using it's medicated abortion. So kind of because these are also like mind-altering substances, these become very contested. It takes on a meaning beyond the drug itself, and that's always been my interest in drugs. Beyond what I said earlier in terms of a vehicle for studying these other things, it's also how is it that we ask questions about how is it that conceptions of whether it's cannabis or meth or alcohol or tobacco or cocaine or opioids or sugar or water.
Food.
How have these, or why have these, they're not fixed. Drug effects are not fixed, just like their meaning is not fixed. So diet pills were pushed on American women, in the 1960s and 70s. Diet pills are speed. Well, that's the street name, or one of the street names for it. And amphetamine. You get all your energy from this pill. And that was perfectly normative. But then we alter the chemical structure slightly, and with methamphetamine, we have a completely undesirable substance that's, when it's generated or when it's created in a trailer in the desert, that's very problematic. But college students sharing their Adderall or Ritalin with other students, that's all right. But it's meth. Chemically, it's meth.
Yeah.
And so, but we don't look at it in those ways because we're talking about a different population that's using it. So, I mean, I love looking at drug policy too because it's dynamic. It's constantly changing, which kind of adds a layer of kind of responsibility and work for teaching it, but it's exciting I mean, week to week, there's something happening. I also teach statistics, or I have historically, which is super exciting. Students love statistics. It's like sex, drugs, rock and roll, and statistics, right? Maybe not even in that order.
What are some of the readings or exercises you do in that class, Drugs and Society? Which, by the way, let's all be clear, is CRIM 420. So it's I
that
feel like
name.
we need to know about that name as well.
Yeah, well, I grabbed that name. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
420.
Yeah.
It's a date.
Criminology and Justice Studies being the program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Criminology and Justice Studies, CRIM 420. When I proposed the course, I grabbed 420 as the moniker for the name, or the number for the course number for the course. What are some things that we do in there? What are some activities that we do? I mean,
or authors or readings.
Oh,
or
yeah. Well, I've loved sharing Peter Andreas's Killer Drugs book with the students. It's a pretty recent title. I mean, I'm not sure what I'll be using the next time I teach that course, but Killer Drugs is the story of war and the story of drugs through 6 different drugs. 3 what we consider now illegal drugs, and 3 legal drugs, so opium, cocaine, and methamphetamine or amphetamines, and then caffeine, coffee, and tobacco. Is that right? No, caffeine. Caffeine is coffee. Yeah. Thank you. Caffeine, tobacco, and alcohol. Mm-hmm. So, wars that were fought for drugs, to obtain drugs, to generate income, over drugs, under the influence of drugs. I love using that book. What else do we use?
He's a good writer.
He's a great writer.
Excellent writer.
Yeah, and it's great to have academic writing that is accessible, interesting, even a page turner, I'd argue. Yeah. Much in the same. That's how I found. For me, that's the hallmark of good academic writing, when the author anticipates kind of where your questions are going. But I'm trying to think of other books that I have used, other readings. I tend to assemble a variety of readings for different modules in that course. So
they've evolved over time.
Yeah, it certainly evolved.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of the.
What about films? Use any films or TV shows?
Yeah, I know historically we've watched The House I Live In. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah, it's a little dated now. There's a wonderful documentary I like to share, A Day in the Life, an international portrait of people using primarily opioids in very different contexts. And it's a beautiful film. It's a documentary, Day in the Life. What else? I'm not sure.
Breaking Bad.
No, I don't like
Weeds.
No, we've looked
Nothing
at
on the nose like that.
What I do is I like to. Sometimes I've had students identify songs that relate to any kind of mind-altering substance to share with the class, and I actually still do that. That is, I forgot about that assignment, and I'll share songs. It's always fun too, because I'll bring in like some, old school hip hop, Grandmaster Flash, White Lines, for example. Mm-hmm. I'll talk about that, or even going way back, before my time, Cab Calloway, the Reefer Man. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of fun to just, see what people want to share and how it speaks to them. Yeah. So.
Do you have a favorite 420 song?
Oh, definitely. It's, as I said, I grew up in Berkeley. 104.5 KFOG every Friday at 420 would play Smoke Two Joints. That was, and
that's Sublime. Mm-hmm. Yep.
No, that was, before them it was UB40.
UB40?
Yeah.
That's their song?
Look it up. Smoke Two Joints.
Caleb's looking that up right now because that seems preposterous.
Yeah, smoke 2 joints in the morning, smoke 2 joints at night.
That was UB40.
Yeah.
No.
I smoked 2 joints before I smoked 2 joints. Well, you can't.
I mean,
have to edit that out.
It would make some sense though, because it is a what's that called? I'm showing my age now. But Sublime is doing a particular kind of music that is descended partially from whatever UB40 was.
Dancehall.
Well,
Reggae-ish.
sort of. They were
Reggae-ish.
They were a pop
Reggae.
band.
kind of, but
dancehall.
not
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Jamaica. I mean, you
yeah.
don't have to be from Jamaica to
No,
to,
yeah,
to
that's true.
reggae
Yeah,
and
yeah,
dancehall. But
yeah.
what did you find?
I did not find.
Oh, you didn't find anything.
I don't know. You might have just made this up.
No,
Josh.
I did not make it up. It was UB40. Smoked 2 joints every Friday at 4:20.
Yeah.
What I may be wrong about is it might not have been at 4:20. It might have been at 5 p.m. It was almost like the whistle's blown, 5 p.m. People are off for the weekend, and they would always play Smoke 2 Joints. So for me, that's what I conjure when I think of 420.
Okay. Did you ever make it up to Redwood Park back in the day in this area?
You know, unfortunately, I did not. Kind of blew it. Yeah, I blew it. It's one of those things you sort of take for granted. Yeah, you know, and come to think of it, I don't think, even in Boulder that had a huge 420 event, I don't think I ever made it over to that. That was on in Folsom Field on the CU Boulder campus. No, I didn't. But I certainly.
It's never too late, Josh.
You could see.
It's never too late.
You could see and smell. Yeah. And I remember from my office, I'd be able to see just crowds of people heading up to Redwood Park.
Yeah, that trail right there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's no longer a thing, is it, up there?
Well,
Redwood Park? Are you going to leave me
I'm not-
wondering until next year?
I'm not sure I can. Well, I was there. I was there on Saturday. Yeah,
And there were people.
there were people.
Okay.
I in fact got there. It was I got there about 4:00, and I'm walking in, and on the left there's this little skate ramp thing, and those guys have bongs, and I think that's just normal for them. I don't think it's a 420 thing.
Right. Yeah.
So they were clearly and then there was like a family having a picnic,
yeah.
and some of the people around, and I walked out to kind of like a little, away from the family basically, and was kind of looking around, and then suddenly, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, like these little groups started emerging out of the
woods.
the woods and the trailheads.
Yeah, sure.
And
sure.
people were carrying bongs and smoking joints, and it was actually like it would have been a really cool thing to film because it really was kind of like people just emerging from
Right.
from the woods, with bongs, and it was an interesting scene. It was super low key. It wasn't super crowded. I think that's what happened basically to the 420 celebration in Redwood Park. Is it got difficult to handle in terms of people, they didn't have good bathroom facilities apparently back then. Apparently there was
Well, you couldn't.
too much shit in the woods
Right.
and stuff like that.
Yeah, the city didn't sanction
The city
it.
was not happy with it.
Right.
So they engaged in this low key civil warfare.
Right. Disruption of
Disruption
it.
of it. Yeah.
No, I totally remember that. Yeah, and part of the problem was, and it should be different now. Well, no, it can't be different. It's all the regulations. So, yeah, prior to legalization, they couldn't sanction it because it was illegal.
Right. Yeah.
And now they can't sanction it because, well, who's going to have a permit? You got to, I mean, you could do that, but that kind of undermines, I think, the spontaneity of 420 when you think of the spirit of the event, and whatever urban legend you want to follow about its origins. It's one thing that's common is it is sort of this kind of spontaneous,
Organic.
Yeah, organic.
And we're kind of back to that point, actually, and I think it's kind of neat, I do know that people who remember the 420 as it was organized are quite fond of what a rager it was.
Mm-hmm.
There was a man there actually, who our friend Bernie kind of met. Well, do you remember this guy I'm talking about?
Mr. Powell.
Mr. Powell, that's it. And he apparently in Sacramento in '72 gathered signatures for the first Prop 19, which was to legalize cannabis in California in 72. And he was the kind of guy that, like, I mean, Bernie walked over him because he was pretty sure that he'd get a lot of acid from him, basically. But this guy was just like, he had this, these, memories of, times past that were, little more, crowded, let's say. But he was enjoying the way it was now. He's just like, he just wanted to come and smoke a joint and leave. Like literally, like he wanted to come to the park, just smoke a joint, talk to some people, and get out of there. Didn't come for a party. So it was kind of that spontaneous kind of like ritual,
Yeah, and I wonder, what I mentioned that I was at Humboldt my first year at college, and I wonder if 420 as an event emerged. I think it must have emerged after I was a college student here. I mean, that was 85.
Yeah.
Yeah, Humboldt had something called Lumberjack Days, but that was all about alcohol primarily.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, I have the T-shirt still from that event. It's an image of a lumberjack running, carrying a keg of beer, which speaks volumes about kind of college campuses in the 80s. There was all about alcohol promotion, but weed, forget it.
Well, I'm pretty sure that was the cauldron from which the hipneck culture emerged. The sort of convergence of the the hippie and the redneck culture fusion.
Right.
Of,
around Lumberjack Days.
Around Lumberjack Days, I bet. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're getting to the end, but one thing we do like to do is some student questions and some questions that they had for you in particular. The main thing that students really wanted to know was about the book that you and Dom co-created.
Oh, awesome.
The first question was, how long did it even take to just create it?
God, it's so funny. I just tabulated the hours the other day.
Oh, did you?
How do you have the time for that? No. Yeah, it was just, actually, I was thinking about it, though, in terms of when we initiated that work. And I want to say it was maybe 2018.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe
so.
so.
It's a long gestation period for an edited volume. And I don't know if it's, I've never, aside from my dissertation, I've never written another book. I mean, I didn't write this book necessarily. We edited it. And I don't know if it takes more time because you're relying on so many contributors. But yeah, I'd say it was probably 3 years. And
I think that's about right. I think more like 3.5 because there was a period between the idea being brought up and then
when we
doing the book proposal,
right,
and then launching on it. But
right, and the pace of the work changed as once we had a contract, once we started to invite author contributions. We were actually told by the editor when we were done that he was really quite surprised how quickly we got it done. So yeah, these things take a long time, but it was a great experience doing that with.
It was awesome.
Dominc.
It was so much fun. I spent so many hours on Zoom with Josh,
through the pandemic.
Through the pandemic as well. Like I got to know his family a little bit in the background, it was pretty funny. But it was just daily.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just like, several times a week. It was like daily.
We had to hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
Get this thing done. And that's, I think for, in terms of students asking that question, it really speaks to, for me, the value of collaboration.
Yeah.
That's been very helpful for me in my career, working with others. I'm not a go it alone. I like to be able to share ideas and get confirmation and just and then the accountability piece. Like for Dominc and I both, that was key. Like I've got to get this piece done or I've got to read through it by this date, because when you're doing it on your own, it's so easy to not get distracted by other things.
Working together is actually, it helps so much.
Yeah.
I value that a lot, and I take that into the classroom a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like want you guys working together. You know, like, yes, I want you to be able to do stuff on your own, but when you're working together, you're not just accountable to yourself. You're accountable to your friend, literally, like someone that, like, you don't want them disappointed in you. You know,
You're going to be working with people your entire career.
Yeah.
Inevitably, in some capacity.
Yeah.
So it's enormously valuable.
And it's actually a kind of I think a rare skill in today's society is the ability to work together, because we're all forced into like this individualized, like, you know, context.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is like you're the individual, you're responsible for just like yourself. And I think that it's a challenge. I think you see that in the weed cultural economy, you know, like where it's difficult for people to work together when you see it up close. But when you see it happen, like you see these like partnerships, you know, that like, I think I first noticed it around cultivation. It was always at least like a 2-person thing. It was like, oh, and usually it was guys. So it was like, oh, those 2 dudes, you know, like they're the growers for, you know, this stuff, right? But yeah, the collaboration was a lot of fun, and it took about 3.5 years, I think, to answer the question directly.
That's great. Did you and Dom come up with the what's the word for it? Did you and Dom come up with the concept of post-prohibition, and how did that come about?
I'd say it's Dominic. Yeah, Dominic came up with that. I mean, we shared.
Well,
we talked it out together.
We talked it out.
I mean, and part of it was, you know, how do we talk about this? I mean, part of it is framing up this moment, you know, and the moment. And keep in mind, the moment we were writing this, not only was it the pandemic, we were also seeing a resurgence of, you know, nationwide protests for racial justice and against police brutality with the murder of George Floyd. And so all, you know, and this was under, you know, under the Trump regime.
Yeah.
So you had a confluence of forces that were very unsettling, you know, pandemic, you know, people in the streets, you know, a racist, misogynist, bigot in the White House. I don't want to disclose too much of my opinion of him.
It's okay.
And, you know, all these other superlatives. But the point is, you know, and then we're trying to make sense of this moment we're in terms of how we are thinking about cannabis as a focal point of social change, as an engine for different types of markets. How is it navigate? How do we govern? How do we set policy in different spaces, geographic spaces, at different times? And yeah, I mean, I think it was your concept, but I think it was became a very useful way to wrestle really with the tensions, because there's a lot of tensions when we think about cannabis. I mean, just even talking about 420, right? Yeah, so under prohibition, the city couldn't sanction a 420 event because it's against the law. Right. Okay, now we have legalization. You can't have a 420 event because you don't have a permit. Yeah. So these are different ways in which kind of the ghost of prohibition persists, you know, and you know, and so
the literal material context. Really.
Yeah. And so it was very helpful to be able to talk this out. Yeah, conceptually with Dominic.
If you know, the thing is when you can talk it to yourself all you want, but until you talk to another person and they're like, yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter. And I had been struggling with understanding what the hell was going on. I think since, you know, when Washington State, say 2015, the newly legal industry led the charge to kill the medical industry, and I was like, what? You know, like right. I was shocked. I was shocked that any of these like newly legal businesses would turn around and beg for enforcement. And in Washington State's case, like just kill the medical program entirely. That didn't come from law enforcement. That didn't come from your traditional prohibitionists. right? And at that point, like I was struggling to make sense of it, and really, it boils down to it's a context, right? And then also dealing with, is this an era, right? Like what era are we in? And it's like, well, you can if you explain it that way, but also it's a context, right? It's legalization with, not after prohibition. That's how you explain what's going on, or is the grounds from which like you can begin to explain what's going on. Because if you just assume it's legalization, why isn't anything working, right? And you don't acknowledge, well, the structures of prohibition are still here, then you're never going to come up with an answer that meets reality, right? Which is the irony of using a post term,
Right.
is like it's a really like material context. It is not a out there postmodern post-structuralist, the sort of caricature of what those are necessarily, which is like, that's disconnected from material reality. No, it's absolutely about our material context that we're living in.
Our last student question, Josh, what is your hopes and goals for the future of the Cannabis Studies program?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, I think it's obvious that I'd love to see it continue to grow, but I want it to be sustainable, in terms of, sometimes programs can be too successful and too many students come, or then it becomes too difficult for students to get into a program. That's just kind of a bureaucratic issue. I want it to attract students, not just from California. I think that's really important that, and not just students from the States. For this to be an international program. It is very unique, and I imagine students are aware of that. A bachelor's degree in the interdisciplinary study of cannabis. Because when you look at the curriculum, it is truly interdisciplinary. There are some material hopes. I would love to see there be greater resources for the program, to hire more people, hire more faculty. My hope is that 10 years from now, we have alum who are coming back and talking with students about the righteous work they're doing. Yeah. In policy, in the environmental sector, in their communities in terms of maybe it's equity work. That's where it's super meaningful for me, as an educator. When you hear from students who came through, that's a big hope I have, and that it's healthy and vibrant in 10 years, and that I'm healthy and vibrant.
Heck yeah!
Me
Thanks
too.
so much,
Yeah.
Josh. It's been a pleasure.
Need a
My
recap
pleasure.
episode in 10 years.
What's that?
Need a recap episode in 10 years.
There you go. I like that. Well, thanks for having me in.
Of course, thanks for coming.
Always a pleasure, Josh.
Thank you for growing with Subsistence Crop, a podcast by the Cannabis Studies Lab at Cal Poly Humboldt.